This is Cybersecurity Distilled with Andy Bennett.
Hello and welcome to the next episode, depending on where you are in the series, the first episode of Cybersecurity Distilled, an Apollo Information Systems production. And they pay me to say that. They're not a sponsor, but they are my employer. And today is a special episode because I'm joined by another, I'm going to say former CISO, because I don't think you're ever really a former CISO. I think you are a CISO who is now doing other things, because once a CISO, always a CISO. My friend and colleague, Chuck Herrin, please introduce yourself, and then I want to finish this intro.
All right, sounds good, Andy. So yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks very much. My name's Chuck Herrin. I am a former and maybe again sometime CISO. Like it is really one of those things. Some people are geared to run away from fires, and some people run towards them. And for some reason, people like you and me, I think, are that second breed, and I don't know why.
Moths to a flame, my friend. Well, and so the reason I said I have a different intro, I am a little bit known for my love of the single malt spirits. I don't drink a whole lot of them, but I really like to focus in on the really good ones when I do. And so today's different. Today is the first time on Cybersecurity Distilled that I am going to make a cocktail. What are you drinking?
Oh, I anticipated this. Actually, I had no idea you were doing this, but I went distinctly low rent today and went with a classic Jack and Coke with, here in Texas, you can get the Mexican Coke with real sugar. So it's sort of just a classic. So I've got my better stuff is downstairs. This was up here. So.
Well, I had to go downstairs to get this because I don't normally drink cocktails, because like I said, I don't actually drink that much, despite hosting a show centered around drinking. And so today I went with I'm doing a gin and tonic today, some Bombay Sapphire, not a sponsor, but you could be. I would probably drink a little more gin if you were. But you probably have a parent distillery or distributorship that has other things too. So the reason today is cocktail day, and I'm so glad you followed on theme, whether it was intentional or not, is because of that shift. We both have a shared past of CISOing or running security organizations, because not everybody even has the title, but definitely has the responsibilities.
Right.
And now we have gone to the dark side, the other side, the vendor side, the service side, whichever version of that you call. And it's been quite the mixture of ingredients in the journey that we're here. And so today is a cocktail day. Cheers.
Cheers. Or as they say in Iceland, where I just got back from, skål. And I'm sure I got that pronunciation totally wrong. But
I don't think you got it all that wrong. I don't think you got it all that wrong. That's SKOL with a little symbol above it, I think. And I think you were pretty close there. So no two episodes are alike, except that they involve me talking too much. And so today's episode, I want to talk about the cocktail that goes into what we do, how we got where we are, and stuff like that. And I also, I know that you have a particular set of skills, just like every other Liam Neeson character in their own version of their cybersecurity show. And I want to get to those too, right? And I do want to talk about things like APIs and why they matter and whatnot, which is how you've found a new post CISO or interim CISO path of passion. So I do want to dig into that. But
sure,
the question I get asked the most across the board, more than any other, is how did you get into this? And that's a twofold question. The first one is, how did you get into security in general?
Okay.
And I started off as a back office technician. And how did you make the progression from wherever it is you started to CISO? Because for a lot of people, CISO is the goal. And a lot of people don't know what they're asking for too. But
yeah, for sure.
So lead the way.
Yeah, and that second point is really critical, actually. I can't tell you how many people over the years have said, I want to be a CISO. And I ask, why? Like, it's not that it's a bad job, but what do you think you're going to get? when you get in there, just because you're the boss now, I suppose. So how did I get into security? I'll try not to take too long with this, but this is a sort of my origin story. I was at a very large bank in the Carolinas. I'm from North Carolina, so my accent is a mix of North Carolina and Texas, which makes it, just even worse. And we were managing a desktop migration, and we were rolling out the first desktops actually in this bank. And this is around the late 90s or so, early 2000s. And as we were rolling these out, I noticed all these things that we were doing that I didn't think that we should be doing. They seemed like they were bad security practices. And I was a project manager guy. I mean, I was interested in technology, and I'd gone to computer camp, back in 7th grade, and I had my Trash 80 and my Commie 64, and all the things that those of us that grew up in that generation did. But I wasn't a professional tech really at the time. I had been a teacher, and that didn't work out too well just because I hated the parents and the administration. I loved the kids, but the parents and the administration made it a non-starter. So I left that and I got into technology. And as we're doing this, there's this theme that I've noticed that humans do, and I've picked this up over the years. I didn't understand it as much at the time, but we adopt new technologies before we know how to secure them. We continually do this. And I know you're a student of military history, and there are all kinds of parallels outside of the computing realm to human history, always fighting the last war, that types of things. Well, we do that in technology, and I was noticing this as we're rolling out these desktops. We're doing things like back in those days, if you remember, we would do things like everybody was local admin, and everybody, like, we would roll out connections to production databases, and you would set up the ODBC connector with SA and no password, right? And that was baked in, and everybody was logging in as admin to the production database. Just insane things that we wouldn't do now 20 years later because we know better. And so you may have seen the Ron White, comedy skit a while back where he talked about being arrested for public drunkenness or something. Said, "I had the right to remain silent."
They call me tater salad.
Right.
I had the right to remain silent. I didn't have the ability, and also
I
didn't
have the ability.
My favorite line from that particular skit, and I hope there's no copyright to all of this, because this is an homage to a wonderful comedian, in my opinion. Who shares my shtick on stage. But it was, I didn't know how many of them it was going to take to kick my backside. And I'm family friendly, but I knew how many they were going to use.
I knew how many they were going to use. That's right. And in this case, the particular pearl of wisdom that later Tater Salad brought to the stage was, I had the right to remain silent, but not the ability. And so I was voicing my concerns, and they were being, very definitively ignored by the executives over that group. Basically, just shut up and do your job. And so I knew enough to be dangerous, and so I wound up showing them how, with Microsoft Excel and something called stored procedures in Excel, you could take the access that I had and that we were rolling out to literally everybody in that building, and take over the SQL server, which in this case was also a domain controller, another bad practice. And so I think the command was something like XP command shell net local user evil hacker add, or net user evil hacker add, and then XP command shell net local group administrators evil hacker add. And if you ran that on a domain controller, you just added evil hacker to your domain admins. And so I showed them how to do this, which was maybe not the most diplomatic approach, but this guy basically called me out in a group, and I was in my 20s and less politically aware.
Less politically astute.
I hadn't been beaten down by corporate America quite so much as it. And so anyway, the security guys came rocketing up from Charlotte to find out what this contractor had just done, because what they heard was some guy just hacked a domain controller. And so we got seconded, and they were yelling at my boss and yelling at me and whatever. And then I wound up, let me yada the story a little bit. I wound up being the eyes and ears for security in that part of the state, because they really didn't have anybody in that part of the state. And cybersecurity wasn't really a big practice back then. In fact, it was often combined with the physical security guys, which are usually the .mil and .gov, physical security type people, which was the case here. And I figured out, wow, okay, there's actually interest, and you can get paid for being a little bit of a pain in the butt. I'll family friendly it too. And so I left there and I wound up
It's not
establishing
actually
a
required,
penetration
just so you
testing.
know. This is
Oh, I'm
definitely
sorry.
aimed at, I said it's not actually required, just so you know. It's definitely aimed
This
at adults. I was just being funny.
no worries. I'm just trying to win in Rome.
Yep.
Um, so I figured out like, hey, there's actually some demand for this. Like people are interested in now. Maybe that guy wasn't interested in knowing how to do it securely, but there were other players here that were. And so I started a really intensive self-study, and I got my CEH and all the certifications back in those days: Certified Ethical Hacker, Hacking Countermeasures Professional, CISSP, CISA, CISM, yada yada yada, over the next couple of years, and started a penetration testing practice for a consulting company. And I did that for a few years. And unfortunately, this leads right into the next part. How did I become a CISO? Um, After 2002, when Sarbanes-Oxley became the law of the land, there was a huge sea change in consulting, where the big five had just gone from the big four to the big four, and they damn sure weren't going to go to the big three, but nobody knew what Sarbanes-Oxley compliance meant. So our happy little fledgling pen testing practice, where we were killing it, we had a 96% success rate, and there's a bunch of rednecks out of Charlotte and Atlanta with laptops. I mean, we didn't have anything like the tools today, but the demand just wasn't there anymore. Everybody was putting their consulting dollars towards SOX compliance. And so I got pulled into doing general IT audit work, and I spent a year in Green Bay, Wisconsin, one January, um, and stuff like I missed my daughter's first steps and so forth. It's like, this is not what I signed up for. It's no hard feelings, guys. But I came here to be a pen tester, not doing IT audit work for these companies. And so I landed at a little insurance company called AIG. And we were Fortune 4. And I worked there on a contract for 6 months. And then my first day as a regular employee was very much a Men in Black moment for me, where the boss that had hired me to be the head of security with him as the CTO, he quit. And it was very much that Tommy Lee Jones, I wasn't hiring a partner, I was hiring a replacement type moment. And I was the head of security all of a sudden.
Just like that.
Just
Yep.
like that. Like
That
I
happens.
was.
Before we dig into that, because that's a fascinating story and one that other people do share out there, and some I will tell you guys out there who are listening that it is often accidental. I accidented into security, had a knack for it as it turns out, and the rest is history. Same thing happens to a lot of people in a lot of different roles. There's no single path to any of these positions. But I want to circle back on something you said, because distillation of complex topics is one of the things that the show is all about. And it's actually the whole reason how we came up with the title, because I want to make complex topics approachable to people. And you used a word that most of the audience and most of the US population, world population even, probably don't know. Seconded. What is it?
Oh, I was seconded. Oh, yeah. I was, geez, how do you define it? I
I
was
know. I know how to define
isolated.
it, but that's because I had to Google it the first time I ever heard it. So
Yeah. So I was isolated, confined, pulled aside in a conference room. So yeah, I was seconded to a conference room and told I was not able to leave
yeah,
for a while.
being seconded is a very interesting experience. You're not actually under arrest or anything, but there are contracts and things in place, and you get moved over and you get dedicated to this one and only topic. And it feels a lot like a grand jury investigation sometimes, depending on which end of it you're on. And you become a dedicated resource to a specific thing for a little while, and
Yeah.
whether you wanted to or not, and whether that was your job or not. And it is a very real thing.
And if you'll remember, so you're of a vintage that you probably remember things like this. Those were the days where Kevin Mitnick and Captain Crunch and these guys, like Kevin Mitnick was kept, I think, in solitary confinement because the authorities thought that he could launch nuclear missiles by whistling into the phone. Like they didn't understand what this hacking stuff was, and it had this grand mystique that it really didn't deserve. But it was like bad, scary. I don't know. Just get this guy over here until we can figure out what's going on. Yeah. It was a different time, but yeah, same concepts for sure.
You say it's a different time. I think it's just a different set of misunderstandings.
That's fair.
It's just a different set of misunderstandings now, and maybe that's where this discussion's headed. So we are at day one. Boss quits. You're the boss now. Holy crap. Tommy Lee Jones, that wasn't fair. Lead the way.
Yeah, so we started with really establishing a security program, and I was lucky. I was very fortunate. I didn't understand how fortunate I was at the time, but that was a big global company, and we were a bit of an island in North Carolina, where we were about, I think we were about 2% of the footprint corporately, but we were about 4% of the revenue. And so it gave us a very favored island status that I didn't really appreciate too much. But what that allowed me to do was, okay, if I'm going to build this program, I'm going to do it my way, and we're gonna hit the ground running. And I didn't know any speed other than full throttle. I still kind of had that problem, and so we went from essentially no formal security program to being ISO certified in 16 months, and made some really dramatic changes. Thank you. And because we were in this island, we were able to then take a lot of those learnings and lessons and become sort of the tip of the spear for the rest of the corporation. And that's where I really started learning about scale. And so over my dozen years or so at AIG, I had 6 different roles. And there's always a bigger fire to put out somewhere in an organization that size. I mean, we were Fortune 4 when I joined, 280,000 people or so. And we were able to use the divisional structure there as kind of like, how the US uses the 50 states as a marketplace of ideas, and the states can try different things and see what works. If you can do something at one of the smaller divisions, it doesn't mean that it's going to work for everybody. But if it doesn't work at the smaller division, it's damn sure not going to work for everybody. Right. And so we were able to be sort of the leading edge for a lot of security and technology risk management stuff there that I'm pretty happy with the impact that we were able to have. And then I moved into a bigger corporate role, and I wound up being responsible for everything consumer facing across the whole portfolio. So we were in my portfolio divisions. We were in 100 countries, 18 major markets. We had 202 regulators, boards of advisors, boards of trustees, works councils, all the different venues. And that was a great experience to learn how to work internationally and culturally. And I had a colleague that this reminds me, I need to ping her. I haven't talked to her in a while, but she was raised in Hong Kong, and her family was English, and we would kind of tag team who would speak to who, right? So where we are operating in a more like paternalistic or a male-dominated society, I would tend to take the lead even if it was her division, just because we got a better response. But if we were in Europe and she had the very nice, British RP accent, received pronunciation accent, they didn't need some American with a Southern accent coming in telling them what to do. So even if it was my division, she might take the lead. And we kind of learned how to use those cultural norms and mores to our advantage, because it's really in the interest of the overall company. It's not about turf. And that was a really interesting, set of learning experiences. So anybody that does want a CISO job or some big global job, I recommend that you have that at least once in your career. But the downside of it is, at the end of the year, when you look back and you realize how much you're actually able to change when you've got 29 divisions with 29 different business plans and 29 different strategic plans, it can feel like you're on the side of a super tanker with an oar, and you're just paddling like hell to go 2 degrees starboard. And okay, we made it a half a degree. Better luck next year, guys. And so for me personally, I'm glad I value that experience, and I value everything that I learned there. But it's much easier to move the needle more quickly in a smaller organization where there are fewer stakeholders that have their own strategic plans and markets and things like that to worry about.
I will also say there's a sweet spot for everybody, right?
Yeah.
There's a tolerance for ambiguity. There's a tolerance for friction. There's all kinds of stuff, right? And there's some people get to small organizations and find that they desperately lack and miss both the staff they used to have and the processes they could rely on to force other people to do their jobs. Other people get to large organizations that are mature and have processes and whatnot, and realize that they get pigeonholed into doing their job instead of being able to reach across the aisle at a moment's notice and help solve every other problem in the organization. And so learning, and it takes experiences across the spectrum to figure it out for yourself, but learning where you fit on that spectrum and what type of organization is ultimately right for you, that is another key linchpin to success.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. And you never know that until you try it.
Mm-hmm. And satisfaction. Yeah. Success and satisfaction, because you can be rapidly successful. I have a friend who has run some massive organizations that you've 100% heard of and bought their stuff, and on more than one occasion. And he is so good at the job, but doesn't like it at all.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
And
that's, it really does come down to, what are you looking for? What are you looking for out of the role? What does work-life balance mean to you? What does satisfaction mean to you? What are you looking to get out of this, right? If it's status because you have a big role at a big company and it makes you feel like a big shot when you go to the conferences, cool. Hey, that's okay. People can value that. But if you're more about really moving the needle and getting stuff done and executing quickly, it's really hard to do that in a 250,000 person organization. Try to get everybody aligned to row in one direction, because they've all got their own incentives and goals, and they're not all yours.
I've never thought of it as a Roman galley until you said it that way, right? It's one big Roman galley, and you got to find the drum and hit it hard enough so that everybody knows when to row it. But also, that imagery has a lot of stark comparisons to bad things too, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of challenges. I think it's more like you need to get it to run like a skeleton team, a rowing team, right?
Yeah.
Than a giant ship, and huge challenges. So what did you do when you left AIG? You left the global Fortune 4 organization, and you did what?
So the world changed for AIG really in 2008, 2009, as everybody, that was in corporate America probably remembers. And in about 2015 or so, I left with some other AIG alumni, and an AIG alumni had actually founded a company called Athene Holdings, and a retirement services company, funded via private equity. And private equity figured out, I still think this is really smart of them, they figured out that insurance contracts and annuities are a great way to lock up capital for long periods of time with predictable rates of withdrawal. And so unlike a bank where people have demand deposits, annuities and life insurance contracts, they have surrender periods and things like that. Sorry, let me let my dog downstairs.
Yep.
1 second. I've got a fussy basset hound up here.
I've got dogs. Mark, what do you think so far since he's not here?
Navigating a Fortune 4 company by using accent ping pong. That was my takeaway.
There you go. So yeah, no, that it's brilliant. That's a brilliant move by venture capital, and gives you control, and that actually speaks to a long-term vision and understanding of the business goals and against the risks and the challenge. And correct me if I'm wrong, since the story is going there. And I haven't actually heard this part of the story.
Okay.
I know a lot of your story, right? But I don't know that part. So, but there has to be a very calibrated, focused direction. Everybody is rowing in the same direction, because there's in that game where capital is tightly controlled and you're seeking predictable long-term gains. That means that there isn't the appetite for that rapid growth to exit curve the same way there is elsewhere. And there's a lot of people who get into business A, B, or C to have a predictable high yield exit. And I say predictable, it is high risk too, because it is high yield, high reward exit in 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. The game you're describing is much longer than 3 to 5 years and is one of statistics over time, less so than economic conditions or anything else, right? Actuarial models really kick in there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like for a given population, sort of black swan events like COVID accepted, but for the most part, we understand life expectancy pretty darn well on a pool basis. And And so, yeah, the business model there I thought was really clever. And then another way that the company expanded their business model was by taking over pension obligations, and taking the assets that were backing pension liabilities, and they made a lot of money doing that as well. So whenever we would announce a deal with say Weyerhaeuser or somebody that were going to take over their obligations, both stock prices jumped. Like everybody recognized it was a good deal. And what we would do is we would take those assets and reinvest them for higher returns. And we had some really strong investment guys that were able to put that money to better use than in corporate bonds and munis and treasury T-bills and so forth. And so we did that, and the reason that I joined was the founders wanted to take the company public. And one thing that happens when you grow via acquisition, we did, I think we did 7 acquisitions in 9 years. So we grew via acquisition, and every time you do that, you're buying the technology stack of the previous company as well as the technology stack of every company they acquired. And there's always been a lot of consolidation and acquisition in banking and insurance. And so it was kind of funny. I remember this guy. I won't mention his name here, but I was coming in and I was asking all the annoying new boss questions. And I was leaving AIG, 280,000 people, 27 or 29 divisions under my responsibility, 100 major markets, all that stuff, or 100 markets, 18 major, all that. And I'm asking all these questions like, okay, we sell annuities. We have 2,000 people, give or take. Why do we have 5 policy administration systems? And the answer, of course, really was acquisition. It's not that we'd organically done it. We'd bought them over the last several years. But I remember he took off his reading glasses and he kind of leaned across the table to me and says, "I don't think you appreciate the complexity of this operating environment." And I edited myself and I sat back and I thought, I think you're more right maybe than I first realized, because we are a monoline insurer. We sell the simplest product in the world. It's the classic 363 model of retail banking, right? You pay 3%, you earn 6%, you're on the golf course by 3 o'clock. 363. We're a monoline insurance company with 5 policy administration systems, the simplest line and so our goal, our focus became simplify this tech stack. And we did. We actually, this is the only place that I've ever actually been where we did we retired the mainframe. We actually shut it down. And all of this was in preparation for going public. And we did. We went public in December of 2016. It was Thomson Reuters IPO of the year. Woohoo! So boss got to go to Wall Street. Boss's boss got to ring the bell. So that was cool. I got a shirt. But that was a really good experience. I would probably still be there, honestly. I had a great time. It was in Des Moines, Iowa. I loved the people. I like the culture of the Midwest, but those winters are ridiculous. And actually, when I accepted the job, I was not planning on moving. This was a big lesson for me. The big bit of a culture shock. At AIG, we were all over the world. We operated in 24 time zones. So you could take a job working with people in another city, in another division. We were all working in different cities and different divisions. And so when I was talking to my hiring manager about coming on board, I didn't have any intention of relocating. Why would I? Like,
Right.
Why? What I didn't understand and I didn't appreciate then, and hopefully if somebody here, listening to this is contemplating such a move, you think about this and benefit from my battle scars. What I didn't appreciate was, it's one thing to work distributed in a distributed company. It's another if everybody else in the company is in the same building and the same room in the same city, and you're the one that's remote. If you're the one that's remote and you're trying to drive change, forget it. And so I wound up doing a lot of travel, and I don't know, a few months in, I told my wife, I said, "Look, we're moving to Iowa." And we moved up there and we did it for a while, but she's a Texas native, and we both grew up in North Carolina, and -30, -40, winter. She did that for about 4 years and said, "You know what? I'm going back to Texas, and I hope you want to come with me." And I thought that'd be a good idea. And so
yeah, so nobody could see the face that you saw when you read those off to me. I'm a Texan too. I have my boots on right now. in one of the episodes, I wore my actual, cowboy hat that I wear for yard work and stuff like that. I am Texan. And I just like ball caps better. They're more comfortable. Sure. The face I made, just so everybody knows, was one of terror at the description that he just provided. And no, I don't blame her. I'm glad you came with her, but yeah, no, that's worth an exit.
Yeah, and that was, but the company itself, the area, it's a wonderful place to live 8 months out of the year. But those winters are just brutal, and bless people that deal with it, that put up with it. But yeah, we decided to come back to Texas, and then I landed at Texas Capital Bank. So actually, the chief risk officer that I interviewed with and wound up hiring me, he lived in that area as well, and he was going to be relocating, and he eventually did to North Texas here in Dallas, and that was my move to Texas Capital Bank, and that's a different story that we probably don't have to go all the way through today. We can get into if you want to, but my second day at Texas Capital, I missed new employee orientation to be in the war room to talk about how are we going to deal with this pandemic.
Great timing.
So we went from, and fortunately I had a long background in disaster recovery, business continuity, operations. I ran infrastructure and security at Athene. And so, we did all the global resiliency and planning, and we did denial of access drills and, shut this office down for this day and activate your BCP unannounced, that kind of thing. I had the privilege actually at AIG, this goes back to my AIG days, of working under probably, I think, one of the best leaders in corporate American history, a guy named Bob Ben Moshe, who came out of retirement to help AIG after the collapse and the bailouts. And if there was anybody that could get that drum beating in one way, it was Bob. And Bob was absolutely adamant about preparedness and resiliency. And, he made it very clear, we are here for one reason, and that is to pay claims. And if we can't pay claims in the event of a natural disaster, why are we here? And he drilled that into everybody's heads. And I took that with me. And I really appreciate his leadership. And unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But carried that lesson through the other companies, and it really makes a difference. That tone at the top and taking resiliency and preparedness seriously is really critical.
So there's something else that's critical that you have adeptly worked into your story, so much so that I'm not sure you even know you do it, even though now that I pointed out, you're going to be like, yeah, how else can you do this? And that is that you have used a whole lot of words that a lot of people probably don't think of when they think of cybersecurity, especially those folks who are starting their careers or a little into their career. They're thinking in terms of packets and protocols and technology and stuff like that. And what you have done is you haven't talked about technology at all, right? And I just earlier today, in one of my chats with a team, I said, hey, this type of work is 75% people, 25% tech. That you need to remember that you're not managing technology when you do this thing. You are managing the people to give the technology time to get done. And you have been talking about the business specifically, and that's what I want to call out, is that every single one of your stories from minute one, since you left pen testing specifically, got shoved into a side of the business you didn't appreciate and a method of delivery that was not sustainable in your life. From that moment on, you've been aligning to the business since day one of being Tommy Lee Jonesed, which is now a verb for me.
It's a verb now. Cool.
You have now, you've been talking about aligning with the business. And it started with when you talked about being 2% of the footprint and 4% of the revenue. Tying back to the revenue and tying back to the thing that drives the business disproportionately drives a piece of the business. Anytime that story can exist, and this is for the audience out there who's looking for that career progression, because I was hoping the discussion would go kind of like this, and and I mean I knew it would. We've talked before. So, but aligning yourself to the business. Everybody says, how can security be successful? How can we get this done? Aligning to the business, and it's hard for a lot of people to come around and stop thinking about technology, because technology is the underpinning, right? But it's the underpinning that enables the secure delivery of business, with the more important part of that sentence being delivery of business. Right. You talked about also you've talked about the type of business you're in and the complexity and the technologist, because the guy with the reading glasses, and I wish I had a pair because I'd do it too. The guy with the reading glasses saying, I don't think you appreciate the complexity. He was focused on the technology. I don't think you appreciate the complexity of the technology portfolio we're working with and the interoperabilities that we've had to build to band-aid the thing and all that kind of stuff, right? Instead of focusing on what you did, simplifying and collapsing and focusing on what will enable the business and help secure it, he was focused on the technology at that stage. I'm sure he came around, and I'm sure that you've actually kept in touch with him at some point, since you were like, I don't want to name him, because he's probably gone on to bigger and better things, because that's what happens. This is a small world, and when you're surrounded by people who have moved the needle the right direction, you usually follow the needle or you fall off the side. That's usually right. That's usually how this happens, and I'm not being hyperbolic about that at all, right? I'm not exaggerating that effect. It is absolutely how this works, and if you can find somebody who can be that guide and mentor for you in your career, not just like somebody you can talk to once in a while, because I've got some people who I actively work with and mentor, right? But I'm giving them third-party perspective, not leadership from the front. Leadership, finding somebody who can be that for you as a leader from the front and paying attention to the lessons that are trickling down, because they're not going to have the time to explicitly all the time say, and hey, Chuck, I think that you need to focus on this if you want to achieve that goal. They're going to be doing the things that support the business if they're doing things right. And hopefully this discussion that we're having right now helps people see that that's the key to staying on the path. And whether your path is to become the senior most technical person in the organization, the chief architect, or whether that path is to become the boss, because that's sometimes the motivation. Aligning to the business is equally critical in both places, and you have to be able to speak the language of the business to understand the underpinnings. And now I want to pivot to specifically, not a lot of us exist. I am a business continuity guy too, and so the lesson of the leadership at the top focusing on resilience and preparedness. Now, the resilience and preparedness is directly business aligned with the insurance industry, right? You have to be able to help people out when they're in their bad time, and you having a bad time at the same time is not an excuse not to help them.
Exactly.
Right? And so the story is pretty easy there. Banks, same thing. Ever since the Black Friday crash that led to the Great Depression, and there's that history degree kicking in. Ever since then, there have been rules and regulations that ensure that banks are always available. And the banking industry itself is one of the few places that has moderately to mostly kept up with changing trends. They've fallen behind and gotten slapped a couple times, but they've kept up with the changes in delivery. They're one of the few industries with a regulatory mandate, for example, of a full disaster recovery exercise every year.
That's right.
A regulatory mandate. Let me say that again. A regulatory mandate in that industry for a full disaster recovery exercise every year, where they actually restore their business system, bring it up and make it functional for business. They often don't conduct real business in it because it's not a real disaster, but they simulate traffic that would be the same. They test the connections to make it the prod system if they wanted to. They get right up to where they could hit enter and it would become prod, all that kind of stuff. No other industry that I'm aware of actually has that as a regulatory mandate outside the financial space. And I'm generally, I am from the South and somewhat conservative. My most conservative friends confuse me for a liberal, and liberals confuse me for a radical conservative. Right? It's a trap.
I got you.
Yeah. I'm not a super fan of driving things just through regulation, but I am a fan of results. And in that space, it has gotten good results. When was the last time somebody actually in the United States couldn't get access to their money for more than 3 days at a time?
Yeah, that's right. It almost never happens today. And I do think that's the way that regulation should drive behavior. It's like those regulations, they're not about protecting the banks. they're about protecting the consumer. They're about protecting the people. Like, and you know, in 2008, I actually still have FDIC alerts on bank failures. And there for a while, we had Bank Failure Friday. Every Friday afternoon, you get emails from the SEC, I'm sorry, not the
FDIC.
SEC, FDIC, yeah, about which banks are failing and who's taking over custody of their assets. So before they announce that the bank is shuttering, they have already lined up. This is who you can go to get your money, right? It's about, you know, making sure the consumers have access to their funds. They don't care if your bank goes out of business. I mean, it's inconvenient, but it's kind of like the new SEC regulations on board directors for cybersecurity. That's about transparency. Those regulations aren't going to make your company more secure. They're about, if you suck at security, we expect you to tell us that in your corporate filings. That's really, and it's the shame that comes with having to admit that you're bad at it that's going to drive the positive behavior. But the you know, the requirements themselves don't say anything about actually, you know, telling you what to do to be effective at it. But I agree, and I think a lot of other industries would be better off if they did more of that. But outside of market pressures, you know, it's hard to justify the ROI. And in fact, actually, in insurance, it's kind of interesting. One of the difficulties in managing priorities across a portfolio of insurance companies is, let's say that you manage the security and resiliency platform for a life insurance company and travel insurance. So travel insurance, you get calls from all of the airlines and you know, kayak.com and Travelocity and Expedia and all these travel websites. In real time, you get these API calls to book travel insurance and submit quotes. And if you don't answer within X number of milliseconds, they move on to the next carrier. They are very, very interested in performance, resiliency, you know, speed, latency, or if you run a trading desk, well, we literally moved trading floors closer to the New York Stock Exchange because of the milliseconds of lag and high frequency trading. Contrast that to a life insurance company that still gets their life insurance applications via fax from agents in the field. That stuff is irrelevant to them. You know, and why, if the office is closed tomorrow, who cares? You know, if you're selling annuities, do you need to put a lot of focus on your mobile app? You think people are going to scroll to your mobile app, you know, 3 times a day to see if they're still getting 3.5%?
Let me
They're
check my
not.
life expectancy.
Right. Like, and that's where the part where when it came to helping, you know, align priorities across all these different divisions and companies, you really had to understand the business. So your point earlier, I thought, was spot on. I've got like 22 things that I say over and over again until my people get sick of hearing it. But one of them is, you can't secure that which you don't understand. And that goes for technology and it goes for your business. If you don't understand your business, the one thing that I think a CISO needs above any other quality, anything else, technical, business chops, whatever, is credibility. Someday you're going to have to go to your leadership team and say, I am uncomfortable with this. I feel this is too risky, etc. If you have not demonstrated that you understand their business and what their goals are, and then they don't believe you. And if they don't believe you, why are you here? If your role is to be an advisor on risk and business risk that has a technology flair to it, and you don't understand the stuff, can you imagine? Let's say that you're on a ride to the airport, right? And you've got a 19-year-old kid driving an Uber, taking to the airport, and you're talking about, you know, security awareness campaigns and how to measure effective metrics, and he weighs in with his 2 cents on, this is how you should do it. Are you going to listen to him? No, he doesn't understand the field. He hasn't been doing this at all, right? You have to establish that credibility with leadership. So the one time when you have to make that hard call, that they believe you. And you can't do that if you don't understand the business, and you can't do that if you don't understand the technology that your business is running.
Well, and you have to look for those opportunities to establish credibility too. That's another
Sure.
big piece. But you have to have it, but how do you establish it? And establishing it is by finding opportunities to demonstrate the expertise and the integrity, because those are the two different things that are required to generate credibility.
Yeah.
Expertise and integrity. And integrity is frankly more important because expertise is allowed to have gaps. Integrity is not.
That's right. You're exact. Well, I used to describe the CISO role as 50% risk management, 30% expectation management, and 20% marketing. So, the risk management, that's a big part of the day job. Expectation management, how long is it going to take for us to retire the mainframe? About 2.5 years.
Well, first you assumed that the CISO job is a 100% job. It is a 120% job.
Fair enough.
Minimum. And secondly, I think that planning has to be one of those factors. Having plans and contingency thinking is a critical success factor, not just at the CISO level or CISO. By the way, CISO is an unacceptable pronunciation. CISO or CISO. Yeah, it's a thing apparently. I was on Reddit and they were, how do you pronounce this word? I'm like, there's 2 acceptable pronunciations, just like SIM or SEIM, right? Don't care, right? It's not a SIM.
Yeah.
Right.
Good.
So I'm waving my hand around. Yeah, it give me preaching. So
getting into the GIF versus GIF debate.
Oh man. So which is it?
GIF.
It's a GIF. It's not a GIF. I'm sorry, kids. It is not a GIF. GIF is peanut butter. A GIF is a picture.
Yeah,
and
got it.
Now I just lost half my 50 followers.
Well, it's, and what does CISO stand for? Half jokingly, career is suddenly over.
Well, in some places it's CSO, which is just Chief Scapegoat Officer.
Yeah, fair, right? Well, or unfair, profoundly unfair. But that comes with the territory, though, right? I mean, if something goes wrong, whether you had a hand in it or not. And actually, this is a Bug's Life thing I got from Bug's Life. Oh, when did that come out? 2000 or something?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah. I remember that scene when Hopper came in and he was asking the ants where was his food or whatever, and the princess tried to blame everybody else and tried to blame the weather and whatever, and he said, "First rule of leadership, princess, everything is your fault." And when I was making the transition to management, it was about that time, somewhere in there. I just that stuck in my head. First rule of leadership: everything is your fault. And your CEO doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. Your board of directors doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. Nobody. Investors don't care if you didn't have enough hours in the day to get it done or whatever. You don't get to pass the buck. That if you want a job with chief in the title, that's what you get.
I could not agree more. And I was actually just having a discussion along these lines just a couple days ago with somebody. And it was one of the most important lessons of leadership I've ever had was from a former supervisor. And he's actually, at the time, he was my boss's boss. And in a meeting, he said, look, and I may be paraphrasing, and that's okay, right? Look, every single person here, we don't go back to our teams and say, well, I don't really agree with this, but leadership is making me do whatever, right? You're going to leave here and you're going to leave with the direction. And you have 2 choices. You either deliver this because it's your choice to move forward as planned, or you quit. Too many people forget that they have the opportunity to walk out the door at any time they want.
Yeah.
It's either the way we are going or the reason you left. There isn't a different way when it comes to leadership. And I don't know if he knows who he is, if he ever listens to this, but if he does, then he'll text me after he hears it and laugh at me, because that is his style, which helps narrow it down who it is as well. But
I completely agree. Completely agree. If leadership isn't aligned, your people can they see it. You hired smart people, and you have to be aligned. When you leave the conference room and you've made some decision, even really hard decisions, staffing cuts and things like that, right? If the markets turn against you or whatever, you're in or you're out. And what it means is you can't change the circumstance, but you can change how you react to it and make the best of it. And but there's no waffling and deflection. That's not leadership. That's that's just blame. That's trying to be a buddy and not trying to be a friend and not a parent. It's trying to be a buddy and not a boss. It doesn't work.
Although the buddy boss thing is challenging when you've worked with the same people for a long time. That can be difficult. And that's okay, sure. Right? That's something that both of you actually. There is, like, I've got lots of people I consider friends who have also been my employees, and working through that is part of what makes you professionals, right? Understanding that that the thing that happened at work wasn't personal. If there is ever a negative thing that went down at work, right? Being able to separate those things and understand that as long as they were done in good faith and with integrity, that's that integrity thing popping up again, that
Right.
that you just move forward. It is what it is. And you know, I've had to fire friends too. It's been a long time, thank goodness, right? And I bought them a drink after work.
Yeah, but sorry.
But it had to happen.
Yeah. Well, I think the main point of that comment wasn't so much that you can't be friends with people that you work with.
Yeah. No.
But it's that managers, especially new managers, need to understand that whenever there is a hierarchical relationship with an employee, somebody that reports to you or reports to somebody that reports to you, every interaction with that person is tainted because you have an invisible card on your forehead that says, "I can fire you." And they are not, they can't not see it. And a lot of times the manager doesn't see it. They're not thinking about it that way because the balance of power is in, you know, is in their favor. So I just don't want anybody, especially if you're moving into management or into leadership, you need to make that conscious change to, you know, now you are a member of management. You know, you're not listening to what they say anymore. You're they.
You are they. That's I think that's what they forget when they make the transition, right? And it is hard, and it can be the hardest when you are promoted from within a team over as the boss of that team. And I don't think we really need to dig into that too much. That's probably somebody else's podcast. But that is a very hard position for a lot of people, and not everybody makes that transition well. And frankly, if you really have aspirations to promote, sometimes the best place to promote is somewhere else. And I hope I'm not just encouraging any of my fantastic team to do that, because I don't want to lose any of them. But it is true that sometimes the best place to promote is somewhere else. And sometimes you can come back after that. And it does happen. People boomerang all the time, especially if they liked where they worked.
I agree. Well, I have mentored 5 CISOs in my career. And actually one of them has mentored at least one other CISO. So I think I'm a grand CISO now, if that's a thing. And that's, you know, it sucks at the time. You hate losing that resource. Obviously they're high potential and you like working with them, or they wouldn't have been your in line for succession. But you can't wait them, you know, you can't expect them to wait until you die to move up into the big chair. If that's what they want, they're going to go somewhere else, and that's okay. And it's bittersweet, but that's how people grow.
Yeah, and they have to, right? You can't always wait for the seat to come open. And also, you're probably not the only person looking to get in the seat.
That's right. Well, I always had the philosophy of having 2 qualified successors at any given time. And what that means is I've got 2 people that can do the job, even if it's a stretch, but they're not going to wait there forever. And I was lucky in that my own career trajectory was such that I wasn't in the seat for more than a few years before I had a bigger challenge and a bigger challenge and a bigger challenge. So it never really got stale. But at one point in my AIG tenure, I was in one role for several years, and I was getting worried. Like I gotta find these guys something, whether they're a peer of mine or something else, because otherwise they're gonna go away, and we're gonna lose all of that now tribal knowledge and institutional knowledge that we've, you know, poured into these folks. And retention is just so much easier than finding the right talent from the outside world. And I'm a huge fan, by the way. I didn't mean to get into the philosophy of hiring here, but I know a lot of one thing that we talk about in cybersecurity is the skills shortage. And I think that we as a species focus way too much on the hard skills and not nearly enough on the ambition, the ability to learn, the flexibility, the ability to operate in ambiguous circumstances. The subject matter stuff can be taught. And I think it's important that you don't overemphasize the certifications or the technical skills, because like when I went to Iowa, for example, here's actual data-driven demographics. There were about 600,000 people in the southern half of Iowa in the workforce. Of that, somebody will check my math, I'm sure, but if memory serves, something like 2.4% of that workforce was in technology. And of that 2.4%, 1.2% was in security and risk. And if I was going to target the top 20%, there were 88 people. And I needed about 30 of them because there are 60 insurance companies, 60 insurance companies headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa. And so you obviously can't just go to the market and just float a job description and expect a flood of resumes to come in, like you're in Houston or Chicago or one of the tier 1 cities. And so very quickly I realized, look, we're gonna have to we'll buy the talent where we can find it, but we're gonna have to build it. And that's what we did. We started with a balance of what roles do I need to buy and what can I build. And the downside of building talent is there's only one way to get 5 years of experience, and it takes 5 years. There's no compression algorithm for experience. But if you find the right people, by the time they've put in that 3 to 4 to 5 years, man, they know your company, they know their colleagues, they know the business. They are really, really superstars in that role. So if you've got the runway for some of your roles, hire young people and support them, and they will absolutely be your star performer. Invest in them, and they will be your star performers in a few years. You just got to give them a shot. Don't gatekeep them out because they don't have their CISSP yet. That's a stupid reason to pass up on somebody promising.
Yeah, I focus on KSAs. A is the important one, right? It's aptitude, not just abilities, but aptitude.
That's right.
And that is easily the most important thing. I will also say to the people who are junior to mid-career, and I was very guilty of this when I was too. Don't try to rush it. It's not just about easy money now, it's about long-term potential. And if you try to rush it and you go past something that is a natural progression for everybody else, you will find a ceiling be sooner than you intended to. And the trajectory will end up ultimately being longer than it otherwise could have been.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point.
Patience is a virtue that I never learned, but had enforced.
It was imposed upon me.
It was imposed upon me, definitely. I wanted to move faster than I did at a lot of points in my career. And looking back, I'm glad I didn't. Yeah, I could have, bought a fancy car a lot sooner or something. I would not be where I am if I had skipped a step.
Yep, that makes sense. I agree.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to business continuity and disaster recovery, right? Because I think there are a couple different things that I credit to helping me hone my aptitudes and build the knowledge and skills in the industry specifically. And they are that I did not, and neither did you, and neither did any of us that started when we started. I didn't come in as security. I came in as I was a hardware tech. Then I was a field tech who was forced into rotations on the help desk. Thank you, Nancy. I still don't appreciate it. And that is not Nancy. When everybody hears Nancy, it's not the Nancy who I loved working for at Texas. This is a different Nancy. Different Nancy, whose last name has changed and all kinds of stuff. So, but I didn't appreciate that, and I'm still not sure I do. But the field tech work and the customer service that I got in that role was fantastic. And then I went to a specialized team, and I accidentally had like a perfectly progressive resume, not knowing what that was when I started my career. And it was a total happy accident. But I tried to skip steps. I always applied for jobs I was not qualified for and whatnot. I'm like, I've only got 4 years of experience in that, but I'll try for the one that requires 8, right? And all that kind of stuff. And nobody ever let me go break my leg on their stuff. And that's one of the things that I want to highlight for the people who are trying to push past that and chasing a quick buck instead of a long-term, secure, stable future, right? Yep. It's that's what having the patience and building the proper resume and skills by you is a more stable, predictable outcome at the end. So I guess I'm playing the insurance game there. But business continuity and history are the two things that I learned. My degrees in history, my undergraduate degrees in history, and when I was at my 2008 story, I was a project manager and applications migration specialist. I was doing modernization projects before they were cool, and some digital transformation and stuff before we were using those words.
Cool.
And I got set on the bench and then laid off. And my focus was I had been shifting into business continuity. I had worked in the banking industry and been exposed to the disaster recovery and stuff like that there. I had some experience with it. My project management, which was my next progressive role was winding down, and I needed to find something cool. And I went and I got a ABCP, Associate Business Continuity Professional certification from the Disaster Recovery Institute. Also not a sponsor, but you could be, because I'm a card-carrying member and have been since 2008. And just
this
saying,
spot available. Yeah.
I've paid my dues. You can pay yours. But that certification, and I've got ITIL certifications and security certifications and system administration certifications. The business continuity knowledge and expertise for contingency planning has been by far, coupled with critical thinking from history, the most valuable part. What say you? What's your most valuable part? And I have a suspicion that you share my appreciation for contingency planning, but what else? What makes it Chuck?
Oh goodness, that's a great question. So my undergrad is in biology, and I think that, and then I was going to be a teacher, and I was a teacher for a little while. And I think that the synergy between those two things of understanding and respecting the scientific method, like let's get some data. We don't want to fall into analysis paralysis, but we don't want to react, just off the cuff when we're making decisions or drawing conclusions. Along with in teaching, I taught 8th grade math and science, so 13-year-olds. And the ability to teach math and science to 13-year-olds who really don't want to be there, and break down things, especially in math. I had 4 tracks. I had pre-algebra, algebra. I'm sorry, so pre-algebra. So two grade levels back, pre-algebra, algebra, and algebra 2, all in the same day. So 4 different course planning, 4 different lessons. You have to vary your engagement style a lot with the audience and explain things at differing levels of complexity to different audiences. And teachers know how to do that because that's what they do literally all day. And you can't really force the engagement. You have to try to make things a little bit interesting. And I think those things really shape my my jumping into technology. Plus, just from a personality perspective, I get bored easily, and I have not once gotten bored since I moved into cybersecurity, 20 years ago. It changes so fast that it's a full-time job just keeping up. And if you're not looking for what's going to be the big thing in 2 years, you're going to get caught behind the 8 ball. And that's a bad place to be when, a company or portfolio of companies is putting their trust in you to be the one that saw this coming. So when I was teaching math, for example, I would teach exponential growth as a concept, which is something that's not necessarily intuitive for humans. But if you have a lily pad that is going to fully cover a pond in 30 days, the question of the students was, at what day does it cover 50% of the pond? And a lot of them say day 15. No, that's linear
Right.
growth. Day 29, it covers half the pond. The first 7 or 8 days, it's barely visible. Right. So if you're not really watching everything that's developing, you're going to be 10, 12, 14 days into a 30-day a 30-day growth curve. And that's really kind of why I got so interested in security, is why I'm so interested in API security right now, is that it's always changing. And from a history perspective, I'm an amateur historian. I don't have a degree in it or anything like that, but I love the history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes aspect of this. Like the further backwards you look, the more forward you can see, the further forward you can see. And we see these same trends over and over and over again. So if you know sort of how that works, and then you can keep an eye on the horizon, you can sort of anticipate the way that this is going to play out, and it gives you enough time to respond, and then not be caught behind the 8 ball when all of a sudden, Chat GPT is unveiled, and oh my God, what am I going to do? Like the next big thing happens. You've actually been watching this for a while and thinking about it.
I was just thinking about Chat GPT when you were giving your run up there, because it's what was coming to mind. So many people caught completely off guard.
Yeah, but we've been talking about it and beating it up for a long time, and I think that now we're looking at the next, what, GPT-4. When we move from 175 billion parameters to somewhere between 1 and 100 trillion, what is that going to mean for us? This is what logarithmic or exponential growth looks like. We're in the middle of it, and the knee-jerk reaction that I saw on the part of some schools, like they're banning Chat GPT. how is that preparing these kids for the future?
Well, not only that, but it's completely divorced from reality because these are
Yeah,
also places where their school happens. So have a code of conduct, have a code of ethics, explain what ethics actually mean, all that kind of stuff, and explain to them how to use the tool properly. Ask it questions, become informed, and then synthesize your own thoughts. It's
exactly.
not about banning the tool. That never works. It didn't work to get rid of pornography. It doesn't work to they can take all the books they want off the library shelves, and all that does is make them more popular. What do they call that? The Streisand effect. When she
Exactly
tries
right.
to sue,
Right.
when she
Take my
tries to
picture
sue
down. Take
people.
take my house picture down. Yeah. And I had never seen her house before that.
Right, exactly, right. It's the when you try to control something in a way that only ends up ultimately bringing it more focus, it's too much short-sighted perspective, which doesn't work in security. That's
Yeah.
actually a fantastic segue there.
Yeah.
And so I want to circle back to AI in a
Yeah.
minute,
Sure.
but I saw your nice segue there because where I want to get to is talking about APIs, and APIs are not new, right?
No. No, they're
APIs
40
have
years old easily. Yeah.
been around forever. But that growth curve you described explains the phenomenon that is APIs. And there's another thing that people need to understand, which is there's natural logs, and there's logarithm, and there's natural logs, right? And you can build an equation that goes slow, jumps up, and then levels out again.
Mhm.
And AI has been on the go slow and just hit its spike, but APIs were on the go slow for 35 years,
Yeah.
30 years, depending on where you think that it starts, right? And with the advent, people started talking about the cloud. I remember I attended a group discussion at the Baker Institute at Rice University in, I want to say 2009, maybe.
Mhm.
And one of the conversations, and there was a former two-star general we were all talking with, and all kinds of other stuff, right? And it was all very cool to much younger Andy with darker hair, and the concept that we were discussing. You want to guess what it is? What it was?
APIs.
What is the cloud?
Oh, what is the cloud? Right. Yeah. What is this?
What
Yeah.
is the cloud? How do we define the cloud? NIST did not have a standard out yet.
Right.
Cloud computing was a buzzword. It might as well be SASE or zero trust, the way it was being buzzworded about, right? Over time, unlike a lot of other buzzwords, the cloud coalesced into a series and set of other things. It's still just other people's computers, but that doesn't make it a bad thing so long as you understand the shared responsibility matrix and model, all that kind of stuff. But on the back end, and what made these systems all tick and be scalable, be elastic, and be any other of the things that make them cloudy cloud, because at one point in my career, we were actually talking about, is that cloudy cloud or just cloud?
Right.
Right? Like, is it really cloud? Is it up there? Is it AWS and separate and Azure and separate? Or is it like self-provisioning on a local hyperconverged system? Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Is it cloud or is it cloudy cloud?
I saw a lot of that in financial services. A whole lot of the cloud offerings were running in their data center in Evansville.
Yeah, that's as a service, right? But not cloudy cloud.
Right. No auto scaling, none of the real things that make cloud technologies. Yeah, no, totally. I remember that, and I remember also as a defender back in those early days. So a colleague of mine, Gurdeep Kaur, so shout out if Gurdeep is listening. She and I and a couple of other folks at AIG wrote the cloud operating guidelines for AIG back in 2010 and 2011. And I remember these vendors at the time telling us where's our data, so forth and so on. And they tried this Jedi mind trick thing, saying like, you don't have to worry about now, it's in the cloud. But no. Let me. The cloud, here's the problem. Cloud denotes opacity, and I need transparency. And there was actually, I'll leave the vendor name out of it, but it was a vendor that's still a big cloud vendor.
When we stop recording, I want to tell you what my guess is. I'm going to write it down.
All right. Yeah, you'll probably guess it. as a big cloud vendor, one of the original cloud vendors, one of the first ones, and their whole business model was going around IT. And going directly to to buyers within the company. And there was a group of us from AIG and some other financial services firms from Wall Street. We went to their headquarters, which happened to be right down the street from the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco, and told them, if you don't stop this proliferation of shadow IT, we are going to order our accounts payable department en masse to stop paying all of your invoices. You are putting people's data at risk because we can't see what we need to see, and you're going around us, and this is unacceptable. And they did. To credit to them, over the next couple of years, they formed a customer advisory board, and they developed a lot of really good ways to be transparent and visible with the way they were handling data. But it took a real intervention type bunch of Wall Street guys showing up on the door saying, let me make this really plain for you. You are going to get blacklisted if you don't stop doing this. But that was it, but they were selling. I mean, I can't blame them for the tactic. It worked. They were,
Sure.
yeah, their ARR was going through the roof. But
hold up. That's a jargon term that most of the audience who are technical people, because we got a big split audience,
yeah,
know what's ARR.
Annual recurring revenue.
There you go.
So if you're going to be running a business, that is the measure by which you measure success, really, in a startup, and especially in an early stage startup, it indicates product market fit. So, do you have something that's going to sell? Do you have something that people want to buy? What's your ARR? And what are your logos? Who have you convinced to buy your product or service or both?
I'll tell you that when I first took over, yeah, no, it's I think it's one of the things that this show has to offer is distilling not just the complex cybersecurity concepts, but the business world we work in. And just because you and I know things doesn't mean that we should assume that the other people we talk to and work with do.
For sure.
We work, especially when we're talking with a lot of technical people. I talk to lots of technical people, and if I start throwing those words around, their eyes will glaze over and I'll lose them just as fast as if I use words like ports and protocols with a board member. They do not care.
That's right.
Let me restate that for everybody out there. If you are a technical person with leadership aspiration and you start talking to the CEO, the CFO, the board members about ports and protocols or technology in general beyond the fact that it costs money and delivers this benefit, you will lose them in T-minus nothing. So anyway, all of that to be said, the cloud is driven by APIs.
Yes, absolutely.
And that was a clunky segue, but it's where I want to push to, because it was actually the whole reason that you and I started talking. And I don't want to run out of time before we get there, right? I want to get to APIs are everywhere. APIs connect all the things you use. People's lives are mediated every day by thousands of APIs that they don't even think of. When you pick up your phone and you are, and make sure I'm not showing anybody anything when I turn my phone around, because there's data here. I'm conscientious at least, right? But when you use your phone and you're looking at Google Maps or you're looking at Apple Maps or you're looking at anything that's got any kind of live data or connection into a backend system, it is using APIs. It is using connectivity between systems to provide and proxy data and mediate the interactions of the end user experience and the back end of those systems. And other than the goodness that it provides, that it actually works, holy hell and hallelujah, how does it work sometimes? Mm-hmm. But it does. Other than that, why do we care? And that's a very loaded leading question.
Yeah, it's a great question because it really does lead into what we do, and the startling disconnect where we are today with respect to the delta between adoption and understanding and security. And so it's not just mobile phones. It's a great example, same example that I use a lot. So you check the weather on your mobile phone, you're using APIs, stock tickers, whatever, but also your web pages. So it's staggering to me. I think you would. You may be more understanding of this than somebody with less experience, but when I talk to CISOs and big companies, and guys I've known for 10, 12, 15 years, and they'll tell me like, yeah, I don't think we have any APIs. I promise you do. I don't know what all they are, but I literally will wind up opening Chrome and just go to their web page and open developer tools. And if you go under network and look for XHR traffic, these are all API calls. And you can see the 200 status code. And so your web pages use APIs, your mobile devices use APIs, and APIs are what they are really is they're just ways that computers talk to other computers, and they're meant to facilitate the data exchanges and also invoke function and then APIs call other APIs, and the lack of visibility into the API ecosystem right now in the security community is what I'm, really mostly concerned about. And it really is the reason why I left financial services to come to as we call it, the dark side. I was the CISO and CTO for a fintech. And then I became just CTO. We hired a CISO that built the security operations. And my whole ecosystem was APIs, headless banking core, OFAC, know your customer, anti-money laundering, fraud, insurance, mortgage. Everything was API driven. The internal servicing screens connected to the banking core via APIs. And I wanted to see, I'm old school, right? So, graybeard here. The old Microsoft Stride threat model: actors, assets, interfaces, and actions. Who's doing what to what via what? In any ecosystem, you need to understand who's doing what to what and via what interface. And I keep having to remind people, API, the I in API stands for interface, application programming interface. So it's an interface between systems, and I couldn't see it. And so anyway, I wound up meeting these guys out of Tel Aviv that were working on this problem, and some of them had been working on it for a number of years, and I decided to join. But we're at the point now where APIs are 91% of web traffic is API traffic, and that's a stat from our friends at Akamai, and they process about a third of the web traffic. And the adoption
a statistically significant sample is what we will. Yeah.
According to the guys that handle a third of internet traffic, 91% of what they process every day is API traffic. Analysts like Gartner will tell you that APIs, they expected APIs to become the #1 attack surface in 2022. And it's difficult to know whether that's true or not because there's so many blind spots. But they've seen this coming for a while. And the problem is worsening. So as companies, what's driving the change really, I think is what I find so interesting. The move from monolithic applications to a microservice-based architecture, the drivers for that are huge. It's so much quicker to deliver business value. And remember, the goal of IT is to deliver business value. Right. So in a monolithic architecture, which we all have had, and a lot of our listeners probably still have monolithic apps, that's okay. But that's when you've got to do the big, like, weekend-long application upgrade processes. You got to put all your jars and wars in the right directories, and all the teams have to come together, and big complicated regression testing and all this stuff.
Deployment.
Right. And then we all go for beers afterwards and hope the phone doesn't ring on Sunday, but it probably does. That is a hard way to deliver incremental business value. So companies that are breaking these big applications apart into services and or microservices are able to abstract the technology. You don't care what people are using behind the scenes anymore. You don't care what languages they're using anymore. You can just surface all of this via these application programming interfaces. And so the pace and velocity of change is just dramatically increased. But as these APIs proliferate, the security model is still largely based on a monolithic architecture. And so if you think of the security model like take it out of the technology realm or the computing realm, a castle and a moat, right? So you got your monolithic app. It's a big, well-protected fortress of an application. You got a couple of dudes out front with halberds or spears or whatever, and a portcullis and a drawbridge. That's your WAF. And the services, the villagers that live inside the castle walls, and they have their marketplace and everything in there, they're largely trusted. There's no outsiders in there. There's nobody in there trying to steal anything. And you've got your defenses. Well, when you change the architecture from monolithic to microservice, it changes your attack surface to something much more like a strip mall. where you've still got the sensitive stuff on the inside, but now every store has an external door and a cash register and access to the inside. And many companies and government agencies, they still have their security model with those two dudes standing outside with a spear and a halberd, and they have no idea that these doors and windows even exist. And the tooling, the security tooling, like WAFs and even API gateways. API gateways do a lot of good things, but they are never designed to be security tooling beyond looking for, the basics of helping with authentication, authorization, translation, rate limiting, but
Well,
they don't
to slip
understand
another
logic attacks.
term that a lot of folks won't maybe know into the discussion here, they're middleware. They're
Yeah.
not necessarily security tools. They have security features, but they're middleware. They're intended
Yeah.
to handle a process or problem that the original architecture of the two things being used don't natively solve together. That's what middleware is for, just for anybody who doesn't know. And you also mentioned the core earlier when we were talking about financial institutions. The core is where all the actual transactions happen in a financial institution.
Right.
And there's a lot of places where that's still on an IBM iSeries or whatever the latest version is, because they've just never moved and they haven't had to. And they use middleware to proxy those transactions out to the terminals at the counters and stuff like that. And that's also why sometimes there's sync periods between I went to the ATM and I took $500 out of my account. So you can find an ATM that will actually give you $500. You go and you take out money from your account, and it takes 4 days for that to post to your account, even though you got it directly from the bank that was at a branch. And that's why, right? And it's because they're having to filter, and it's middleware was the point of this, and not intended to be the security solution, only to not be a security hole.
That's right.
And sometimes not even that.
That's right.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No. You're spot on. These things were just never designed for this task, right? The WAFs were designed to protect web applications, and they know what to look for if you think of it in the context of the OWASP top 10. Header-based attacks, things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, things that look malicious. Attacks on APIs, a couple things. APIs expose a lower level of access than I think a lot of defenders understand, because they actually expose business logic to the outside world. And that's not a bug, that's a feature. That's what you're doing. You're making this stuff accessible. And the perimeter devices or the inline devices that you think are mediating this traffic don't understand business logic at all. And so when we get into our case studies and war stories and things like that, we're stealing money from banks undetected. We're changing inventory for diamond exchanges, and taking ownership of precious stones and things. But all of the requests are legitimate requests. They don't look malicious. So we're abusing the business logic that the APIs expose, but none of the defenses that the defenders think are in line are able to understand your code. And just back it up a little bit, as a listener, just think about it. How could your WAF possibly understand your code base? It's not magic, right? It looks for rules, it looks for things that it knows to be malicious. But if you make a legitimate request, even if it's an unintended result, let's take the Facebook Cambridge Analytica example. Facebook exposed an API that allowed you to download information on hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. What's the hack? Like the system was designed to allow this. When we hacked, the recent bank case study that you and I talked about a little bit ago, we hacked this bank, valid username, valid password, valid token that was part of a session cookie. We made requests to the API. It responded in the way that it was designed to, and we sold off all this money and arbitraged global currency exchange rates and stole a bunch of money at their request. Of course, I'm not going to jail for for the point of a case study, but they all responded. And when you look at the traffic, what you'll see is a request and a 200 OK status code. 200 OK, 200 OK. Like that's the type of thing that we're trying to bring to the market. And then and to understand that the security model of Web 2.0, or the monolithic app, which is you can take that. This is something that I really, or if I could turn back the clock, I would, and make people change and fix their applications instead of hiding it behind a WAF and depending on the WAF to do all the security, because that doesn't work in the API space. You can't take your 98-pound web app and put it in a bulletproof limo like you used to be able to do, and not ever fix your app. Like whenever we do pen tests, and I'm sure that you know our listeners and you have seen, if you actually look at the security of even modern web applications, it's still pretty bad. SQL injection, like stuff we've known about for decades. But we get this false sense of security, we put it behind a WAF, and it helps most of the time, but it doesn't help with when you expose these application programming interfaces. It's a lower level of access. And the number of defenders that don't understand the amount of attack surface that they're exposing. Gartner, by the way, I hate to keep quoting them, but they just came up with some interesting stats, and we talked to them a lot. They're predicting that by 2025, we as a species are gonna expose more attack surface via APIs than UIs. And the number of companies that actually have API security as part of their security program is probably in the single digits.
I think that is probably true. And so from my position in the industry, I'm only just now seeing any actual API security tools that are API security focused, API visibility focused, API understanding focused, starting to emerge. And they're all expert systems, by the way, right? Because the machine can't do the thinking yet.
Right.
They do require a brain attached to the user of the system, and that's not the same for all tools, by the way. There are a lot of security tools out there that you don't actually have to have an expert on staff to get some value out of. To maximize the value, you're going to need a skilled user regardless of the tool set, right? And that's just because that's how maximizing value works. But there are EDR platforms, for example, especially if you opt for the managed or semi-managed service that goes with a lot of them,
Mm-hmm.
you're right there, right?
Yeah.
And it's a low threshold for value. But if you want to maximize the utility of that system, you still, via APIs, pipe the output and telemetry from those tools like an EDR over to your other security tools to gain visibility. And I did all of that to wrap this around to a trend that has been, other than talking about the business, has been showing up consistently throughout our discussion from you, which I appreciate. And is one of the things I've always appreciated about you, is that visibility is key. And and you've used the word unknowns, you use the word blank spots. And I don't know if I'm getting that from this discussion or a previous discussion, but visibility, I've been starting to almost keep a tally of how many times you used a visibility or a visibility synonym in the discussion. And you're up over 10, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. And I really am quite a broken record in this regard, especially in this space. And it comes back, I think, to a perennial challenge that CISOs have had as long as I've been in the space. So, 20 years or so now. I remember when I went to, I'll keep which company it is, because I don't want to talk about this particular aspect of their security posture in public. But one of the companies that I was parachuting in to assist as a CISO role, I couldn't see all how many servers do you have? How many applications do we have? Right. So you ask the desktop team, you ask the server team, you ask the cloud team, you ask whoever, and you get different numbers. And so to the leadership, when I was giving my 90-day report out in the role, I kind of took it out of the technology realm and I said, so guys, look, I used to be a teacher. Let me give you an analogy, if I can. Let's say that our mission, like my goal is, I'm going to take all of your children. I'm going to take them on a field trip to the Houston Children's Museum, right? So we were talking about a cloud migration, and we're gonna migrate to the cloud. And I want to take your children to the Texas Children's Museum, the Houston Children's Museum. And the problem is, I don't know all their names. I don't have a list of them. I don't know who's allergic to peanuts. I don't know who likes to play hide and seek. I don't know who has anxiety issues. I want to take them into this big common space where there are other schools and other people there, which was the analogy for the cloud. What is your confidence interval that I or any other custodian is going to be able to get your kids home to you safely at night if I don't even know what we have? right? Just forget about bits and bytes, ports and protocols. I don't know the stuff that we have to run this business. And more concerning, neither does anybody else. Nobody in this company knows how many servers we have. And, as defenders, this is something that I see a lot. And I have to pull some of our engineers kind of out of their advanced attack type things that they're thinking about, and like, come with me. Literally, I had some guys from Tel Aviv with me over here a few months ago. Literally, come with me to this ISSA meeting and listen to what the CISOs are talking about. And the topic on that panel was, we keep having certificates expire, and I have no idea, how many certs we have, how many apps we have, we don't know how many servers we have. It's like, this is the challenge that CISOs are dealing with. It starts with visibility. If you don't know what you have, you can't secure it. And everything flows from that. And to your point about expert systems, I think that's true. Like, it's tough to keep up with all these technologies. And how do you put all this information together in a way that can give the defender what I always try to give to our customers is something that has three parts: what, so what, and now what, right? Not just, hey, we detected a 401 error code on this endpoint on this API. So what? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Does that mean you blocked something? I don't know. Like, what is that? What does that mean? That's a data point. That's not something I can do anything with. So getting that to that boiled down and filling those blind spots in their telemetry, like if they've got a SOAR platform, an XDR platform, or whatever, cool. Let's get that telemetry in there. So like a recent case study, I'll go into for just a second. But this is this is an example of how an API attack would lead to a broader attack. This company, or this entity, we assessed 1 out of 35 of their subdomains that we saw to the outside, so about 2.8% of their attack surface. And we enumerated all of their user accounts via 3 different API endpoints to the outside. So I got 100% here, 100% here, and 100% here. And then we found another endpoint where we were able to elevate our privilege from just a user to a publisher, which gave me not me, my tester, the ability to upload a malicious file. We use the iCar virus, so it looks malicious.
I'm nodding. Nobody can see me nodding if I don't talk. I'm nodding. You can see me nodding and you can't.
So we uploaded an obviously malicious file to an insecure file upload part of the application via another API endpoint. And then we found that we could further elevate our privilege via cross-site scripting, persistent cross-site scripting, to admin and lock out other admin users. And so what's the next logical thing if you're looking to extract value from this company? It might be ransomware, right? That's pretty common, pretty prevalent. I've got all your users, their email addresses. I know what roles they have. I'm hosting now malicious software on your system, so the link is legitimate. The next thing is a targeted phishing campaign to try to get people to download that ransomware, and then I'm in. The XDR, if you're not looking at your API traffic, you missed all of those indicators of an upcoming ransomware campaign because you didn't see what we were doing, and everything that we did looked like legitimate traffic to the WAF and API gateway. Like everything was okay. We didn't brute force anything. We didn't man in the middle anything. We didn't decompile your mobile app and dump it into. There's a tool called MobSF, which is a lot of fun to play with, by the way. To download somebody's app out of the Google Marketplace and dump it into MobSF and take out their API keys that are probably stored in there. We didn't do any of that stuff. We just went directly to the API endpoints and abused them directly. And the next phase would have been a devastating phishing campaign, ending in ransomware. And the defenders missed all that. In the banking example we talked about earlier, we're literally stealing money by selling one currency for another and abusing the business logic the bank's core systems use between what they charge for interest or conversions and then what actually settles into your account. So they calculate to 6 digits past the decimal, and they settle at the penny place at 2 digits. And we found that by selling 0.01 British pounds, we got 0.0155 Canadian dollars, which rounds up to 0.2. Which is a legitimate transaction. That's just normal. That's what the banking core does. And then we did that a couple 100 million times. But in all of those cases, valid username, valid password, valid token, making a valid request, the API backend system responds as it's designed, and we're stealing money. And eventually we ran out of money to steal, but because we made conversions free, we just converted it back to British pounds, and then we sold it again. And then we converted it back and sold it again. And so we went from 10,000 to 20,000 to 40,000 to 80,000. And you can see where this is going. And to kind of wrap up on those, it's not like these types of attacks are new. Like that's a salami slicing attack.
It's the plot of Office Space.
It was Office Space. That was 1999. Further
it's
back.
It's the plot of Office Space, people. I want everybody thinking about this that way. It's not a new problem. It's just a new iteration.
It's a new attack, sir. It's the plot to Superman 3. That was 1983. Richard Pryor drove up in the Ferrari, right? That's 40 years ago. Like, banking has known about these types of attacks literally for decades. What changed? The interfaces that they exposed. That's it. And as these new interfaces change, your attack surface changes. And the attackers know this. And the defenders have not yet caught up to understand, oh, holy cow, I'm editing myself again for family friendliness. Like, my attack surface has changed. This digital transformation, when you hear this digital transformation sort of buzzword, like, there's real business value in doing it. That's not slowing down anytime soon, but it changes your architecture. And as a result, thinking of the strip mall analogy, your defenses have to adapt. And if you haven't redone your defensive posture and redone your threat model and understand what APIs you actually have, or if you think you don't have any APIs, go talk to your head of development, ask if you have any APIs.
Newsflash, you have APIs, and
you
I don't
do.
care who you are, where you are. I'm a comparatively small company with no actual internal development of any kind, and nothing but, I say no actual internal development. We have a little, I guess. We have some interns do some scripting on some things that we're curious about, but we're not a development shop. But we have SaaS services, and we have to make sure those SaaS services talk together. And two of our SaaS services that we need to talk together didn't have open APIs that were well documented, that were pre-built to talk to each other, even though they should, because they work in the same industry, same space, which is a whole different discussion, by the way. And I wish I was naming names on that stuff because they both suck. But we had to code our own API to make those systems talk together. And I'm not a development shop. I'm a relatively small company. You know, we're not that big. We're quickly becoming not that small, but we're not that big.
Andy, I got two things, and I talking about the open API spec. I just got a little triggered with an absolute horror story that I heard this past week that I want defenders to understand, so that you can kind of see how this problem gets even exacerbated worse. So first, I was on a panel with Howard Holton. That's a guy that I like very much. He's the CTO for GigaOM, and shout out Howard if you're listening to this. But he had a great question that I still repeat from time to time. If you don't know, how many APIs does your storage platform expose? How many of them are documented? And how many of those are you monitoring? Right? And if you have anything but one answer for all three questions, you've got blind spots. And the chances are your cloud platforms, your storage platforms, your backup platforms, all these things have APIs, whether you know them or not. They're exposed to attack surface. And then the horror story. So clearly not going to name these guys. I was talking to a potential partner, somebody that works in the API space. And what they do is they help companies publish APIs, expose APIs. And one of the things that our platform does, I'm not going to make a platform plug, so I'm trying to keep it non-commercial. But one of the things our platform does is we auto-generate API documentation from the source code and the traffic and all the insights that we can get, right? And it usually saves developers about 40 hours per API. And I'm not picking on developers. Nobody wants to do the boring stuff, but finding APIs that are documented accurately is actually quite a challenge. And so these guys were showing me how their platform generates documentation. And so we had an API, and if you're not in the API space, one thing you may hear the term of a contract breaking change or a breaking change. And what that means is when you change an API to the degree that it doesn't work in the way that your consumers of the API are expecting. That's called a breaking change, and you generally have to update the documentation, tell people, and all that kinds of thing. And so we were talking about the way their platform generates documentation, and then they showed me this feature where, and then actually, and if you want, you can go up here and you can edit these pieces out and just delete, and then republish your open API spec, or as we call it in the space still, a Swagger file, which is kind of a legacy term, but we can republish your Swagger file and take all these things out. And I said, hey, wait, hang on a second. What? We didn't just change the logic there, right? I mean, we didn't change the actual API. We just changed the documentation. They said, no, we didn't change the logic. The logic's the same. Why would we do that then? Why would we voluntarily remove pieces of documentation? And their use case was, well, a lot of companies take an internal API and they expose it to the outside world, but they don't want people to know what's available to the outside because it might be risky. So we just give them the ability to remove that documentation so that they can publish it out there and only expose the stuff that people want them to know. But the functions and methods are still, like, it's still exposed. You're just you're literally creating
You're one
blind spots.
fuzzing accident away from exposing everything. And I've got a similar horror story. I worked at a place where the internal developers, we were running it, something changed and we were having production issues. And I finally was able to corner them and say, so guys, why isn't this working? And without giving anything away, because I have to be very careful right here. The gist of it was that the previous year they had needed to go faster, and some helpful enterprising agent at vendor X provided an internal only API that is not in the customer facing documentation, but is fully exposed, that was then used to hopscotch the development process to do it right. They used it as a shortcut, and in the new release, the API was removed because it was never intended to be public. And that's what actually broke.
That's what broke. Yeah. Yeah. I just think I actually just thought about, over that last sip, I thought about a new acronym: blind spot as a service. Right. So the documentation that they're generating literally is BSAAS. Blind, like we are selling the ability to proliferate blind spots.
You have no idea how in tune we are, because you just set up my closer, which is, I always try to do something, a short form, something like a lightning round or something like that before I give you a quick spot to plug, what you do and where you do it, because that's fair. And it is, it's specifically, I like to get quick thoughts back. And it's often about buzzwords and stuff like that. And so you just create a new buzzword. Love it.
BSAAS.
BSAAS, right? And I feel like that's something I've been offering for years, but I didn't know it stood for blind spot. And so first, you mentioned using MobSF and checking APIs and stuff like that with it, which is very cool. And yeah, absolutely. But the way you phrased it triggered something in my brain that is never, and you use the word triggered now, so it's stuck in there, in my brain, that I've never thought of before, which is, are API keys now the new passwords in plain text? We've been fighting passwords in plain text and in places forever. Is that API keys now?
Yeah, it is. So imagine that we all traded pictures of keys with each other, and everybody had a 3D printer that could print metal keys at home. Right. We use them for what they are not intended to be used for. They're meant to be identifiers. Right.
Well, authors rarely get to define the purpose and function of their work. And later on, people will absolutely define your work for you. If you've ever written a book or told a story, somebody else will tell you what it meant to them. And that's very true. Just like authors of software, if it is able to do something it wasn't intended to do, a user group will find a way to make it do that other thing if it meets a need of theirs in some way, form, or fashion. So moving on with the lightning round here. XDR, buzzword or BS buzzword or functional concept that should be applied?
Great idea in practice. I'd love to see it be real.
Okay, cool. I have opinions, but I'll save them. So SOAR, You hear about it all the time, security orchestration and automated response, just in case anybody's wondering what it stands for. XDR is extended detection and response and is a play on EDR, endpoint detection and response. So SOAR, same thing. And I have a feeling it might be the same answer.
Actually, this one's a little bit different. So I actually have some really positive experience with Microsoft as a bit of an early adopter in their platform and Sentinel. And because we were a Microsoft shop, it was a bit of a unique scenario. Sorry, this is not as quick an answer maybe as you wanted, but we were literally a Microsoft shop. Desktop servers, web servers, Azure cloud, so forth. In that context, the visibility that we were able to get with Microsoft Sentinel SOAR platform when we properly instrumented it, took about a year to really get it running, was actually really good. So for that specific tech stack, and we put the effort in to properly operationalize it, I could see some really, really detailed stuff. That was that, but it's not a magic like, hey, I bought the Azure AD P2 license and now I can see everything. No. You got to do the work. But when you put it all together, it actually worked really well. And we were able to build some playbooks and some automated pieces that it worked pretty well, but it took a while.
It takes a long time. Let me say that for everybody out there who's ever tried to rush a SIM/SOAR/ any of those visibility exercises. If you rush it, you're going to get out of it what you're putting into it. And it's going to be hazard results with mistakes. And if you want full details out of it 3 months in, you might as well not start.
I completely agree. And when you're budgeting for it, make sure you budget for headcount and capacity to run it. Otherwise, you're just buying a plane ticket halfway to Europe.
And for those of you who are using, for those of you who are using, that's a great analogy. For those of you who are using service providers, same thing. They have the same challenge getting all that stuff up and running that you would personally. You're getting it through a different cost model, and it requires partnership and diligence and execution with intent to make it happen. And if you drag your feet and you're like, hey, I'm paying for this service and I'm just not seeing what I want out of it, well, there's a strong possibility that that's a two-way street. And it really takes SIM and visibility projects are massive undertakings.
Mm-hmm.
And they require input, diligence, feedback, not just reactions. They require an understanding to be successful.
It
does take discipline. It does take discipline. Low maturity shops, and not a slight on anybody ever. Low maturity shops often struggle with this because they're trying to get out of firefighting and they're stuck in it and they need results now. And there are some things that take time.
I've had this conversation with CFOs multiple times over the years, and I'll pick up let's call it a SOAR project or a SIM implementation. It's going to cost us $1.5 million. Okay, what can we get for $750,000? Nothing. If you want to save $750,000, I'll save you 1.5. Just don't do it. Don't bother.
100%. All right, we're ruining the lightning round.
Sorry, don't mean to ruin the lightning round.
No, it's because we're not done talking, but we are coming up on the 2-hour mark, which is kind of like the
holy crap.
We're pushing it for it is long form, and people listen to this while they're driving and doing other things, right? I'm sure that if they're like me, I actually listen to my podcast on 2x speed.
Yeah.
So it's more like an hour, but we are coming up on that. So
right on.
SASE, next buzzword, SASE.
I always thought that was stupid.
It's pretty stupid, right? Like, I'm pretty sure that that a couple Gartner analysts got together, and here's Gartner again, right? A couple Gartner analysts got together and they said SASE. I bet we can make people say SASE. They're like, all right, what's it stand for? They found a legitimate kind of concern out there in the world, and they built this thing around the word SASE to make people say it. And that's my running theory.
Yeah.
Out there, if anybody from Gartner wants to come be a guest and correct me, I welcome the discourse, and I think it'd be a lot of fun. Come on. But all right, and let's switch over to Forrester now. All right. And zero trust.
Oh, I wish I had coined that term years ago, because 20 years ago I was saying trust is not a control. Trust is not a control. We trust our people. So yeah, that doesn't mean we don't need to monitor what they're doing. Zero trust makes a lot of sense. Very difficult to do properly. And it's pretty cool to see what some projects like OpenZD are able to push forward and actually making it happen. But if you don't know how many servers you have, don't think that migrating to zero trust is going to magically solve your problems. You can't skip the fundamentals. You can't skip the basics.
You
right?
can't skip the fundamentals.
You don't go buying posing trunks and posing oil if you forgot to go to the weight room, right? And expect you're going to walk on the Mr. Olympia stage. You still got to know your stuff.
Yeah, you got to put in the work. And you know what? I think you are rounding out an episode of Cybersecurity Distilled perfectly, because you just distilled our entire discipline in one sentence. You can't skip the fundamentals. It's still about the fundamentals, and it doesn't matter how fancy anything else in your organization is. If you skip the fundamentals, everything else will break.
Yep, completely agree.
You will not get the results you want. That was my last buzzword, and we're coming up on time here. So tell everybody again who you are, what you do, and where you're doing it.
Right on. So my name's Chuck Herrin. I'm the CTO at an API security company called WIB, and we hack and secure API ecosystems for fun and profit. So if you are curious about API security, you want to understand your risk, or if you just want to learn more about the topic, give us a shout. I'm sure we'll put contact info in the show notes, and I will post this on LinkedIn, whether you do or not.
So for those of you who don't know what he's talking about, the part that Mark is probably going to cut out of the beginning of this is the part where we were bantering back and forth, and I confess that I sometimes forget to post the link to my own podcast on my own LinkedIn, and so he's going to make sure that it gets out there.
Didn't want to let that go unsaid.
Can't let that go. I totally understand. Well, Chuck, I've enjoyed this, and next time I'm up your way, we need to hang out. And actually, I've got something that as soon as we hit the not record button, I want to talk to you about.
All right, sounds like a plan.